For the last 2 consecutive weekends, I took my 2 high school-aged kids to each of Central Florida's premier scary Halloween events. Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Orlando, and then Howl-O-Scream at Busch Gardens Tampa Bay. We spent all night at each event, going through the houses and the scare zones, eating weird Halloween-themed food, and even squeezed in a few rides if we could. So what did we think, and how do each of these 2 events compare? Let's find out. We're going to compare both of these Scream Fests in 5 categories: atmosphere, production value, scariness, food and drink, and value for your money. And then we're going to tell you which one we think was the overall winner. But first, here's the key differences between these 2 events. Halloween Horror Nights takes place select nights at Universal Studios Florida. That's the original park, not Islands of Adventure. It has 10 haunted houses, 5 scare zones, a live show, Nightmare Fuel, Revenge Dream, and lots of themed food and drink stands all over the park. A single night ticket for Halloween Horror Nights starts at $79.99, but the price does vary depending on the date. Howl-O-Scream takes place select nights at Busch Gardens Tampa Bay, and it has 5 haunted houses, 6 scare zones, another live show, Cirque X Scream. There's some special food and drink stands around the park, and most of the rides and attractions are still open. A single night ticket for Howl-O-Scream starts at $44.99, so that's almost half the price as Halloween Horror Nights at Universal, and that price will also vary depending on the date. Busch Gardens and SeaWorld are actually run by the same company, and there is a Howl-O-Scream at SeaWorld Orlando as well, but for the purpose of this video, we're going to be reviewing the Busch Gardens version. Atmosphere is the overall vibe and feeling that you get just from being there. It's the energy of the crowd, the decorations around the park, and I'm going to include the scare zones here since those are all out in the open in the main pathways of the parks, and you usually have to walk right through them to get around. And I'm also going to add the entertainment here too under atmosphere, because that also adds to the overall ambiance of the event, and because I didn't really know where else to put it. Howl-O-Scream at Busch Gardens has 6 scare zones that are spread mostly around the western half of the park, and they're all actually really good. The Junkyard is a scare zone that's not far from the park entrance that actually felt a little bit more like a bonus house that just happened to be all outdoors instead of just a scare zone. Other scare zones like Beyond the Veil had a pretty intimidating atmosphere because you had to walk through some really close quarters, and the scare zone Raven's Mill has you walking through a really tight area where there is no place to escape from chainsaw-wielding maniacs. At Big Ed's Demolition Derby, you can ride bumper cars with some of the scare actors for a really cool interactive touch. But my favorite scare zone at Busch Gardens was probably Sin City Zombies that had a Las Vegas zombie apocalypse theme. Halloween Horror Nights puts on a full Hollywood-type production here that starts the moment you walk in the front door. The second you arrive, you know this is a very unique, very popular, and very special event that's popular for a reason, and you get the feeling without ever even having to go into a house that this is an absolutely incredible event. The music all over the park really sets the tone, and the crowd here has a great energy. This is a party atmosphere, there's really cool lighting, and you just can't help but feel the buzz from the crowd when you're here at this event. Halloween Horror Nights is a whole different thing. The scare zones at Halloween Horror Nights, they have a little bit of extra love thrown into the production. This year, my favorite was Vamp 69, Summer of Blood. It was a really fun, really energetic scare zone full of vampire hippies and had an awesome 1960s soundtrack. Walking through here, it was actually kind of hard to tell who the vampires were and who were just the regular guests until they got right up on you. And the front of the park that runs from Hollywood Boulevard to right about where the Animal Actors Theater is was just one long continuous stretch of scare zones. A key difference though is that I found the scare actors at Busch Gardens will give you a little more personal attention, if you know what I mean. They'll walk up a little bit closer to you, they'll make you feel a little more uncomfortable, they'll give you a little more eye contact, and they will leave you feeling pretty uneasy. Maybe it's because there's just fewer people at Busch Gardens, so they can really kind of single you out a little bit more, Where at Universal, they're mostly kind of just ambling around and they're not really singling out too many people. And when they do, it's very brief. They might just kind of jump at you really quick and move away. Where at Busch Gardens, they might follow you around a little bit and kind of stare you down. It's a little bit of a different thing. And a little tip for you, if you don't want any of the scare actors to mess with you when you're in any of the scare zones, just go through there while holding like a food or a drink. I've noticed that they just ignore you since they probably don't want to be responsible for startling you and knocking that $12 corn dog or that $15 beer out of your hand. Both parks have a featured show, and both of them are actually kind of similar. They're both sort of like Cirque du Soleil-esque type of variety shows with dancing, some stunts, magic, fire, acrobatics, but with a dark and gothy Halloween twist. The show at Universal is a much bigger spectacle on a bigger stage with higher production values, but the show at Busch Gardens actually left me pretty pleasantly surprised. It's in a smaller theater, so you're a lot closer to the action, and I think I'm going to give the slight edge to Universal here as the better show because it is a bigger spectacle, but don't sleep on the show at Busch Gardens. It's a good show too, and because there are fewer houses at Howl-O-Scream and the crowds and lines are shorter, it's a lot easier to fit this one into your night there. It can be pretty tough to fit everything into one night at Halloween Horror Nights, so the show there is one that a lot of people will skip just so they can do more houses. But overall atmosphere, here I'm going to give the winner to Halloween Horror Nights. Just being here during this event, you can feel a buzz in the air, and it's pretty obvious why this is considered the premier Halloween event in the country, even if you don't do anything but walk around. Busch Gardens still does a good job of setting the tone, but the overall atmosphere and tone here isn't quite as over the top and in your face as it is at Universal. Next up, production value. So production value is the overall quality, creativity, attention to detail put into the design, construction, and operation of the haunted houses to make it memorable and immersive. We're talking set design and decoration and budget, the props, costumes, makeup, the sound design, and the performances from the scare actors, and the overall storyline from each house. Halloween Horror Nights is known for its immense scale and production value. Universal invests a lot of money into the set design and special effects and licensed intellectual properties to create immersive experiences that are unique each year. This year they have houses based on Stranger Things, The Last of Us, The Exorcist, Universal's classic monsters, Chucky or Child's Play, and 5 more houses with original stories and themes that were created just for this event. Just one house here might be considered a top-tier haunted house if it was a standalone haunt in any city in the world, and here there are 10 of them in one location. The amount of work and production that goes into both the houses and scare zones here is really over the top. It is world-class. There are little details everywhere you look that add that little extra spice, and you can tell a lot of time, money, and effort went into creating all of this. At Busch Gardens, the scale and production value is a little smaller compared to Halloween Horror Nights, but Busch Gardens does put a lot of effort into creating terrifying experiences with their own high level of production value. The houses and scare zones are all really impressive on their own, and there is absolutely nothing to complain about here. The houses here are not low budget by any means, but it is tough to compare against what is really a world-class event, high dollar event at Universal. And Busch Gardens does also tend to reuse some of the same houses from year to year. They may add like one new one each year and keep some of the favorites and add a few new things to the old ones, whereas Universal will create 10 new houses every year. So for production value, Universal Halloween Horror Nights wins again, but it isn't a complete blowout. Out of Halloween Horror Nights' 10 houses, the production values do vary a little from house to house, and some of the really good ones at Busch Gardens are comparable to some of the ones at Universal, and some of the ones that have maybe slightly lower production value at Universal are comparable to some of the ones at Busch Gardens, if that makes sense. But this does come at the cost of big crowds, which can make or break the event for some. Halloween Horror Nights is really popular, and the crowds on weekends can become really huge, and leading to some really long lines for some of the houses. We went to both of these events on a Friday night, and we could only get through 8 of the 10 houses at Halloween Horror Nights, and that was really rushing to make them all. And we had to wait in some pretty long lines. Some were over an hour. Whereas at Howl-O-Scream, we did all 5 houses at least twice and still had time to ride a few rides, see the show, have some ice cream, and not have to rush around to do it all. Next up, Scariness. How scary are the houses and the scare zones? And you know, this is the category where Busch Gardens really starts to bring it. There are 10 houses at Halloween Horror Nights versus only 5 at Howl-O-Scream, but on average, each house at Howl-O-Scream is a bit longer, quite a bit longer in some cases, and they incorporate some elements you won't find at Universal's. There's one house at Busch Gardens that you actually need to crawl through a certain section, and there are outdoor scenes in some of them. The level of blood and guts and gore is about the same for each event. Some houses are really heavy on the gore, but others don't have much at all, and they instead rely on atmosphere and high production value. Dueling Dragons at Halloween Horror Nights is probably the best looking house with some of the best sets anywhere, but it's not really that scary. It's just really cool to walk through. And that can be the case for some of the houses at Halloween Horror Nights, where they trade scares for atmosphere and theatrics, if that makes sense. Busch Gardens knows they may not have as many houses, and they may not have quite as high budget or as many toys to play with, so instead they really lean into the fear factor here. The houses are a bit longer, and the scares at Howl-O-Scream, they tended to feel a little bit more personal, a little more visceral. The actors aren't all just jumping out and trying to quickly startle you, but some of them are trying to make you feel pretty actually uncomfortable. They'll get a little closer to you, hold uncomfortable eye contact a little bit longer. They'll give you a little more personal attention, and in some settings, it can be pretty unsettling. And some of the Howl-O-Scream houses at Busch Gardens are definitely for more mature audiences. One particular house, the Forgotten Uprising, took you through a brothel full of vampires, and there was some stuff in there that was definitely not for little kids. And while I still think Universal gets the point here for overall production value, one particular house at Howl-O-Scream called The Residence, Home for the Holidays, was all 3 of our favorites at either event. It's a Christmas-themed house that was just perfect. We did that one 3 times. So for scariness, gonna give the edge on this one to Busch Gardens. Next up, food and drink. So this is the category that has a very clear winner, and it's really not up for much debate. Probably not even going to spend a lot of time on this one. The food and drink offerings at Halloween Horror Nights are another one of the big reasons you come to this event. And in this category, Universal really honestly blows Busch Gardens away. There are all kinds of spooky food and drink booths all over the park serving all kinds of foods that are themed to go along with a lot of the houses here. This event is almost like a food festival just as much as it is a scary Halloween event, with lots of really weird and honestly kind of pretty gross sounding, but yummy tasting food all over the park. Where Busch Gardens has a few unique booths set up, but it's really nothing like they have going on over at HHN. It's still kind of their typical theme park fare, maybe gussied up a little bit for Halloween, but Universal's food and drink is absolutely next level. So right here, the clear winner is Universal Halloween Horror Nights. Next up, value. What are you getting for your money? So as I mentioned at the start of the video, a one-night ticket for Halloween Horror Nights starts at $79.99, while Howl-O-Scream at Busch Gardens is almost half the price at $44.99. And these prices will fluctuate depending on where you go, and there are add-ons if you want to skip the lines. They have express passes and things like that, which can add a lot of money to these tickets. And the price at Halloween Horror Nights is quite a bit more, but for that you get 10 houses versus 5 at Busch Gardens, an overall better Halloween atmosphere, better food, better production values, moderately better production values. But the crowds at Halloween Horror Nights can be overwhelming, and unless you decide to spend substantially more money on the Express Pass or the RIP tour, it can be nearly impossible to make it to every house in one night. The lines are long, and if you want to even attempt to get in as many houses as you can, you'll be in a constant rush. You'll probably skip the show, you might be rushing through scare zones, you may decide not to try some other food because you don't want to wait in those lines, you don't want to waste time, you want to be in the haunted houses because that's what you came for. and it's really hard to make them all. It really is hard to get to all 10 houses in one night. Busch Gardens only has 5 houses, but the houses are a little bit longer. The ticket price is substantially cheaper. It's a less crowded event. The lines for the houses are a lot shorter, at least when we went. Your mileage may vary. When it gets closer to Halloween, I can imagine all this would become even busier and more expensive. And you can take your time a little bit more here. We did all 5 houses at least twice, and we did the Christmas themed one 3 times. The Residence, we loved that house. And we also had time to get some ice cream and ride a few roller coasters, and the lines for the roller coasters were short too. We waited about 15 minutes for Iron Gwazi, and Falcon's Fury was a total walk-on every time. So for that reason, I'm going to give the point for value to Busch Gardens. It was not only a less expensive ticket, but we were able to do everything and then some for that price. So overall, the winner here in our spooky season showdown is gotta be Halloween Horror Nights. Both events are fun, both events have great scares with quality houses and scare zones, but Halloween Horror Nights at Universal is popular for a reason. The event is just off the charts, and they invest a lot of money and a lot of energy and creativity into making this the event that it is. It may honestly be my favorite event of the year here in Florida across everything. It's great, and it's really something I think everybody should try to experience at least once if they're into Halloween and all that stuff that comes with spooky season. And that's not to take anything away from Howl-O-Scream. It's also a great event with a great price point. It's really worth the money. And the houses are even a little scarier in my opinion, but Halloween Horror Nights just has such a grand scope and great energy and production values and food and all those intangibles that make it the event it is. Really, at the end of the day, Busch Gardens Howl-O-Scream feels like a great regional Halloween event, while Halloween Horror Nights is a great national event, if that makes sense. It's probably the premier Halloween event in the country. Well, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you've been to either one of these events. Tell me what you thought of Howl-O-Scream, what you think of Halloween Horror Nights. Let me know if you made it to the one over at SeaWorld. I'm really curious to check that one out myself as well. And if you like this kind of stuff, want to learn about more fun things to do in Florida, from the theme parks to the state parks, please like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, tell one other friend. That really helps the channel grow. And I will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.